We are in the midst of a fascinating discussion where Sri Aurobindo is revealing to us the secret of a practical immortality. We've seen that in the normal sequence of rebirth, the soul, disengaging from the physical body, also sheds the vital body and its personality, and the mental body and personality, taking only within it the essence of the experience of these three, and gathers or assimilates what may be called the essence of the experience in that personality and the personality itself. Thereby, over lifetimes, gathering a stock of these experiences and even aspects of these personalities from which it can draw upon when it prepares for the next life. Always the focus is the soul's evolution, its development in all the powers of consciousness. And because the soul, the psychic being, is a part of the divine consciousness, it carries within it infinite potential, infinite possibilities for developing itself. And it wants to experience those infinite possibilities. The human personality is too narrow, too limited, and also depending on the particular layer of the mind or vital or the physical bodies which it has taken upon itself, it might find some things more narrow, some things more flexible, but always the choice of the soul is to withdraw when the narrowness of the personality prevents it from growing, when it suffocates, does not allow it the possibility to unfold its infinite potential. That being said, each soul follows its own unique line of development. Although each carries the infinite potential, the way we unfold that potential, the particular aspects of that infinity that we give importance to, from the soul's perspective, vary. And also in the sequence in which these are drawn out. But in the act of drawing them out in the world experience, it is developing a soul personality as distinct from the soul person. The richness of the experiences across lives make for the unfolding of these possibilities of its consciousness and the spreading out of its personality. So Sri Aurobindo uses this vocabulary of psychic being and psychic personality. We saw also that in the three bodies that we have, mental body, vital body, and the physical body, there is a similar equivalence in that your surface mind is supported by a deeper inner mind in which is seated the mental Purusha, the mental being of whom the mind is a personality, but on an inner level. And it is concealed from the outer mind where I say, I am conscious. This mind awareness and I is at best a reflection of the mind Purusha and itself a very fluid mix of the mind's individuality on the surface, the vital individuality, and particularly the body's sense of separateness to form what we call the ego. The practical focal point of who I am. Naturally, therefore, the ego is born with the body and dies with the body. The mind also so developed and the rich experience that I might have in this life, attached to the ego and organized around it, also grows with the life and is shed with the body and the mind and the vital. So we see two very different levels. The surface I personality with the ego sense as its center, and with the prime drives being its desires, its insecurities, its fears, its inquisitiveness, its thought, its ideals. And all these form the prime drives of the surface personality, if you step back behind the veil in the inner mind, inner vital, even at the level of the inner physical, one finds the perspective to be very different, much vaster, more inclusive, even more flexible and plastic. We saw in various examples in our discussion that it is from the inner mind that the insights come to the surface mind. You have a problem, you struggle with it, you don't find an answer, you go to sleep, and when you wake up, you have the answer. What happened was, during the sleep state, your surface mind being quieted sufficiently or dulled, the inner mind now, which already has the answer, is able to put forward the suggestion. And you wake up and the suggestion is present, you don't know where it came from. Or even in our normal mental activity, when you seek to remember something, your mind turns to want to remember, and from inside the memory comes out. The mind only catches what comes. And all of this is the working of the inner mind, whose functioning we are not directly conscious of, which functions perfectly and interfaces with the surface mind from behind the veil. But the inner mind has a greater plasticity, greater wideness, and even is open to the influence of the infinite. And therefore, Sri Aurobindo explained in the passage we have read the last few weeks, that if we want survival of this and continuity of this personality on the surface, it can be done if three conditions are satisfied. It could happen if our mental being came to be so powerfully individualized on the surface, and so much one with the inner mind and the inner mental Purusha, and at the same time so open plastically to the progressive action of the infinite, that the soul no longer needed to dissolve the old form of mind and create a new one in order to progress. We have dwelt on these three requirements, and now they are reasonably obvious. You have to have a focal point through which the soul can act. It must be individualized. This superficial narrowness must open out and join to the deeper inner wideness and plasticity of the inner mind. And at the same time, this personality formed on the surface should be open to the touch of the infinite, and should be able to mold itself and adapt itself to the requirements of the infinite. And the same thing happening now on the vital plane would allow for the vital personality also to be retained, and for the soul to carry them over into the next life without needing to discard. But remember, throughout the suggestion is, it's still the choice of the soul. It doesn't need to discard, therefore it may keep it. And then we saw Sri Aurobindo's vocabulary is very precise, and every time we find a word, we should ask ourselves why. So, in the portion we have already read, he uses two words, mind nature and mental personality. So, I'll reread those lines. Our mental nature and our life nature could then be a continuous progressive expression of the soul, and not a nexus of successive formations preserved only in their essence. So, mental nature and life nature. The next line says, our mental personality and life personality would then subsist without dissolution from birth to birth. So what does he mean by this distinction of mind nature, life nature on one side, and then mental personality and life personality? So the nature is that part of us which is in the movement expressing ourselves. So I can look back at my mind. Its nature is to be inquisitive. Its nature is to be creative. Its nature is to be clear, appreciating precision rather than and seeking clarity. My vital nature can be stubborn, or it can be rebellious, or it can be weak, or strong, or plastic, or narrow, whatever. The sense of the nature is the sense of the substance and its tendencies. In the traditional yogic system, when speaking of the physical nature, they give the analogy of the dog's tail. The nature of the body, the nature is very sticky and it is stuck in the tendency to perpetuate its habits. And if you straighten out the dog's tail, the moment you release the pressure, it goes right back to curving itself. And we have cute stories useful for children to catch the idea. And the one such is a man who discovers a genie, maybe magic bottle, magic lamp, and the genie says, I will grant all your wishes, but on one condition, that you must continue to give me work. At the moment you stop giving me work, then I will take away everything that I have given you. Or I will kill you, whatever the story form it is. So the fellow says, of course, wonderful. So he says, make me a wonderful house, give me all the money, give me all the desires. Eventually he runs out of things to do because the genie does it with a snap of a finger. So a few hours down, he has got everything. He can't think of what else he could want. Genie says, now give me more work or I take it all back. So eventually the man goes to a wise man and says, what do I do? And the wise man's advice is give him the work of straightening the dog's tail. And so the genie is trying to straighten the dog's tail. Eventually it gives up and says, okay, I leave. But the idea behind it is our physical nature, the very substance of this material through which the personality acts, has this tendency. So mental nature can be plastic, vital nature can be strong, physical nature tends to be whatever, dull, and so on. So the mind nature and life nature could then be a continuous progressive expression of the soul and not a nexus of successive formations preserved only in their essence. As it is now, only the essence is taken and the material is dropped and a new material gathered the next time. But if this nature becomes now so plastic and able to open to all the requirements of the action of the infinite, if it has now integrated itself with the inner, and it is well organized as a unit, individualized, then it could become a progressive expression of the soul. Meaning, as this nature grows, from the soul, the influences entering it will shape it, will give it the turn that is needed to express the soul. And in contrast to this, our mental personality and life personality would then subsist without dissolution from birth to birth. Now, separate from nature is the particular formation of personality. There we find the characteristics of your the things which make you distinct. So my personality has a strong interest in these types of activities, has a musical turn and particularly appreciates this kind of activity. Or in my personality I have developed the particular skill of being able to recognize any note and being able to say which note it is. Or in my personality I have developed that skill that I can hear a piece of music and play it instantly. All of these are particular aspects in the mental or vital nature. There are particular aspects and characteristics which have been formed. In my vital personality, I have become heroic. And so that is a form which a resilient or strong vital being may have particularly acquired through experience. And so the personality is what we normally associate ourselves with. And this being carried over is what makes for the sense of a practical immortality. The personality would then subsist without dissolution from birth to birth. And I can say my skills developed in the past birth actually carry over into the present birth. And this, the work done now, will carry over into the next. And what a valuable thing it can be. But Sri Aurobindo uses a word here, our mental personality and life personality would then subsist without dissolution. He doesn't say persist. And you have to ask yourself why. Subsist has a very special nuance. Not only it survives, but it is nourishing itself upon something. So you will say, I subsisted on only vegetables because I could not eat other things or grain. So I have subsisted, meaning I have drawn nourishment from. And so the suggestion in this line, when you read it with this awareness, our mental personality and life personality would then subsist without dissolution. The suggestion is they're drawing nourishment. From what? And you can look at it both ways, and both are implied. They subsist, drawing upon experiences of the lives. One after another, I have taken nourishment from this life, I move into the next life, and into the next. I nourish myself each time, growing in my personality. Or if we look at it in a deeper sense, from within, drawing upon the soul's influence that fills the mind's personality and the life personality, giving to it the particular turn, the particular direction of development as it chooses, infusing into it that plasticity and light and sense of purpose which it wants now to develop in this life or in the next step of this life. So the sense of subsist brings immediately a deeper dimension to that sentence. They would be, in this sense, immortal, persistently surviving. Now he gives the persistence, because now it seems to continue. Persistently surviving, continuous in their sense of identity. This would be evidently an immense victory of soul and mind and life over the inconscience and the limitations of material nature. We saw what this means last time, and the sense of the struggle between the material nature, matter, the tail of the dog, which goes back to its old habit of decay and eventually death, or staying in ignorance or dullness or darkness. But what is it struggling with? From above, the soul, the mind, the life, pushing forward their objective and the material nature into which they have to live in order to experience the physical world, and the tendency of material nature to limit everything, and the base of material nature being inconscience, the tendency of inconscience to destroy everything eventually, to lead all forms back into a collapse, into chaos. So we saw last time the sense of how life entering matter not only is dulled, but struggles to draw out of matter living form. Matter allows for a while and then lets the form draw back, collapse back into the normal darkness of inconscience. Similarly, mind enters the living body, tries to raise it further into mental self-awareness for a while, and then it is the inconscience which pulls back. But life itself has to struggle when mind tries to lift it, because life has been dulled and limited by matter. And so mind has to fight against life even as it struggles against matter. My life energies are weak. I don't have enough energy to think. How often do we experience that at the end of the day? I'm too tired to think. Who's tired? Not the mind, life energy. Why? Because the body has limited it and the body dulls it. If at that moment I drink my cup of tea, I get the boost in the body, the life energy can be more active, my mind pops up and says, okay, now I'm fresh enough to work. But this dependence on the life force, and then itself everything depending on matter, is the sense of narrowing, dulling, which eventually leads to the collapse and the breakdown. And into that comes the soul, which is also bringing into the mind and into the life, and even to that extent that it can in the body, the higher turn of its sense of purpose. But all this from an influence which comes from behind the veil, and only to the extent that the outer personality accepts to receive these influences. We are mostly deaf, dumb and blind to the inner guidance of the soul. We are busy, turned outward to all the things from outside, and to some extent to our own immediate impulses of desires and habits. And that's about all that we have. In the very basic turn to a spiritual life, one makes an inward movement to try to become conscious of our own deeper layers. We rarely become conscious of the soul, we become conscious of its reflection in the personality, or eventually in time one becomes conscious of the inner mind or the inner vital, and from there perhaps more directly the influence of the psychic being. If we can, and to the extent that we can, bring the psychic influence, the soul can seize upon the mental personality and the vital personality and even influence the physical personality and give to them a more and more direct direction for its evolution. But this is the nature of the struggle of soul and mind and life over the inconscience and the limitations of material nature. Strictly speaking, it is the struggle of spirit, of which soul is a part, of which mind it is a particular reduced grade of consciousness, and life is a further reduced grade of consciousness, and of which matter itself is an inconscient expression. So it is a struggle between spirit from above reaching down into matter and awakening matter, while matter as the power of the spirit to express the extreme of limitation and self-forgetfulness is resisting. And so the play of evolution is slow because of the resistance of matter. And at the same time, the slowness of the evolution allows for a rich diversity. At each step of consciousness moving forward, matter pulling back, there is a pause. And so in the struggle to go forward, there is a broadening. And life becomes more complex, more wide in its base. Mind, similarly, when held back from progressing, struggling in trying to progress, becomes more rich, more diverse, more wide. And so each step made to slow down in this struggle between spirit and matter leads to greater complexity and richness of the experience. This is only in passing to understand more deeply the nature of the struggle. We are left now with the final question. Even if you have the immortality of the mental and life personality, what about the body? And we saw last time, but such a survival could only persist in the subtle body, because the mind body, life body form our subtle layers, separate from the physical. The being would still have to discard its physical form, pass to other worlds, and in its return put on a new body. When the body is too rigid, the body is not plastic enough, even though my other parts are more plastic and the soul can carry them, I would still need to shed a body which has become too aged, too incapable to support the plasticity which the mind and life can actually carry. Now this is an experience we all have with age. And one of the problems with age initially is, I don't feel old, I can do it, and I keep pushing my body, and then suddenly the body falls sick. I said, but I could do this earlier, why is my body falling sick now? Because we feel in our mind and vital that we are not old. And then you look at the body and you say, well, yes, now I get pains in joints, and now I get tired more quickly. Why is this? It's so strange. You feel disconnected from the body somehow, and the sense of the declining capacities of the body feels wrong, feels false. And it's true. This is a falsehood. It is the falsehood of the inconscience and the ignorance. And yet, we try to drag the body until it breaks down, it collapses, compels the mind now to accept its limitation. And that's the problem of aging. It's not something you chose, it's not even something you feel, because you feel your mind to be young. And yet the body now is something you have to drag along, and you have to now compromise to its capacity and its pace, its growing inflexibility. And so at some point you say, well, I've had enough of this. It's interesting to see how people who have had very vivid mental and vital life actually are able to push the body much farther. If you have greater vitality, the body also can survive longer. But at some point, when the body is very sick or very incapable, they willingly say, all right, I don't think I want to push it further. Why? Because I would rather now shift into a new body which is plastic, where I can freely do what I want. And you willingly let go. It's not a struggle anymore. But still, the problem is you have to discard the physical form. And when you discard, what happens? You bounce out into those other worlds where your vital and mental body is the normal instrument for action. Now, the continuity of these levels of consciousness is very important to understand. If you see in conditions of war, when soldiers are on the battlefield, there are descriptions you will find in the theosophical literature where they describe a soldier who's running across the battlefield with his gun, and suddenly he hears a bang, the bomb explodes, and he continues to run and hide and shoot, but then he realizes something is wrong, something is strange. And he realizes he's shooting, but nobody seems to be dying on the other side. He feels bullets passing around him, but he seems to be immune. He doesn't realize that he has died, meaning his physical body was blown up in the bomb, and he's now in his vital and mental bodies, continuing that activity, not realizing he has died. Of course, he didn't die. It's the body which got knocked out. But the sense of continuity is so smooth. I have not died. My body is gone. Oh, I didn't even realize it because it happened so swiftly, instantly in the explosion. The practical result, though, is he's lost. What do I do? Even it happens at first, if they had a physical injury, the fellow is now used to walking with a limp, and the physical body is knocked out, and he continues to walk with a limp until these beings who come to help, they say, you know what, you don't need to limp anymore. Oh, really? And then he starts walking directly. Why? Just the habit of the body's conditioning. But your vital body and mental body don't need to limp. They are pretty healthy in themselves. Or, in the transition, there is a state of swoon. The physical body is shed, and I am now in the vital mental body, not realizing the transition is made. And in the state of swoon, of transition, suddenly what happens? If I am vital body, what am I made of? The dullness of the physical body is gone, and all my emotions now become freely expressed. And with it, the most strong emotions, which were dulled by the body's container, now come forward. My passion, my fear, my insecurity, they pop up. And if in my last few years, in the physical body, I had my treasure hidden, and I was always afraid someone's going to steal my money, my treasure, that sense of fear and need to protect my treasure comes forward. And what happens at that moment? You think, what if someone's coming? And you hear the knock on the door, and you can feel, oh, someone's coming for my treasure. You see, the exact same thing that happens in the dream state, where your fear now is objectified, is happening because you are in your dream state. You are in your vital body, in which you were during dream state, except you do not have the protection of the physical body anymore. In the dream state, if a dragon comes to eat me, then in the shock, I pull back and I wake up into the physical body. Dream has stopped. So, Mother describes the physical body like a fortress. Now with my physical body gone, I don't have my fortress. When the dragon comes to eat me, what do? I panic, I run. I'm in a worse condition of fear than I was in my physical body. The miser who's afraid of his things being stolen enters into a state of panic, and everything which he conceives of in his panic becomes now his reality. And so you are in a state of dream consciousness where all the instinctive impulses of your vital nature are being played out. Until at some point, like the soldier, you begin to realize something is strange. You begin to notice, every time I'm fearing something, it happens. How is that possible? And some element of the mind consciousness disengaging from the vital coming into its own, now begins to observe, oh, if I stop myself from fearing, the fear goes away and the image changes. This is a strange dream, and you begin to disengage. It happens inevitably because the soul, just as it withdrew from the physical body, is beginning to withdraw from the vital body also. And the sense of separateness of the mind from vital begins to grow, and the mind can now begin to objectify these emotional experiences until gradually it disengages enough that the vital body is shed and can now dissipate. Elements of this, the knots, particularly the sticky knots of the vital, may stay in the environment as impulses. And we spoke about this in an earlier discussion. They often attach themselves to animals to fulfill themselves, although the mind and the soul have withdrawn. But still in the mind, one could continue in a kind of a fantasy world of the mind's creation. I was a good person, I should be going into heaven. And so I create my own images of heaven. Or what if I was not good enough? I tried to do good, but I have the sense of guilt of all the bad things I did, and maybe I'm actually being led into hell. Where is my hell? And the hell appears, because your mind creates it. Again in a mental dream instead of a vital dream. And eventually out of that also the soul has to withdraw until the mental body is shed. I'm describing this in great detail because what you notice here is the sense of continuity of consciousness until the soul can fully disengage from these three bodies, their nature and their personality. And we enter into other worlds. And in the return, we have to gather material for the mental body, material for the vital body, and then find a new body and put it on like a shell, but a preformed shell. It already has its own genetic tendencies and environmental imprints which you then take onto yourself. Unlike the mental and vital bodies, which you can gather from the grade of consciousness in which you live. And a more refined and conscious mind will gather more refined mental substance because it lives in it. Gather vital material which corresponds to its grade of development. But when you enter the body, well, if I am conscious as a soul, I may look for an environment which is conducive to my aspiration. I am attracted to this space which resonates with my state of consciousness and evolution. If I am not a conscious soul, then the soul feels affinity and instinctively is pulled or is helped by beings whose job it is to help you find the right kind of environment and body. So, the being would still have to discard its physical form, pass to other worlds, and in its return put on a new body. The awakened mental Purusha and vital Purusha, preserving the mind sheath and life sheath of the subtle body, which are usually discarded, would return with them into a new birth. So now, with this practical immortality of the mind and life personality sufficiently individualized, sufficiently integrated with the inner, and sufficiently plastic to the touch of the infinite, these the soul may retain. Always the suggestion is the soul has a choice. It may retain. In such a case, what would the passing be like? You shed the physical body, you come into your own as what? This now flexible, integrated personality. You do not need anymore to shed the vital or the mental. You are sufficiently conscious and individualized that you are not bound in that habitual dream state of the life. I am conscious that I have discarded the physical body, and if in the vital body there are impulses coming up, my individuality is sufficiently organized that I can, as in my physical life, say, but I don't wish these impulses to come up. Oh, those fears, oh, those regrets, fine, they are part of my past. I set them aside because I'm individualized. Because I'm conscious on an inner level, I know these things to be superficial formations and habits. They are not me. I'm able to deal with them. Because I am now plastic enough, I'm able to shift and change them, modify those tendencies, even eliminate them to whatever extent necessary, and center myself more closely to the true personality of the soul. And so I can now say, I have shed my physical body, let me wander around and enjoy the vital worlds. Let me experience the mental worlds. It's an opportunity between two lifetimes on earth to explore those domains which I cannot explore easily in my physical life. And so you explore those worlds, or you go and meet your friends. Well, I've just shed my body, but I would like to say goodbye to so-and-so. And you wander around, go to that place, meet those people wherever they are on earth. In the subtle body, distance doesn't matter. You want to be somewhere, you think of it and you are there. And so you meet your friends, you see what they're doing. So they're having a good time. My children, my grandchildren, I'm worried about them. Let me just say goodbye. Meet, give your greetings. They may incidentally remember you meeting them in their dream, if the contact took place at the level of the subtle body in their dream state, or not. Or they'll just feel the presence, and then the presence goes away, and that's it. Goodbye, done. And you wander around exploring these worlds, and then you say, fine, now I'm done. I need to rest and prepare for the next life. And so the consciousness withdraws. And in an experience similar to sleep, what Sri Aurobindo describes as a psychic sleep, there is a withdrawal into oneself, an interiorization. The form or the sense of the vital and mental personality remains, now going into a kind of a sleep or a swoon. And then the soul goes within into a state of trance. Unlike sleep, which is unconscious, the soul is entirely conscious. But the trance state means it ceases to be aware of things around, it dwells into itself, integrating and assimilating all the life experience. And then, when the integration is complete, in a movement which is a spontaneous movement, the soul says, and now I turn to what I have to do next, and draws out, puts forward the imprint of what it needs. And after having had a life, let's say, of great comfort, it says, now I want to have a life of adventure where I have to struggle and overcome challenges. And so as it turns, it draws out that aspect of its personality, which is the heroic, that power of its nature, which is to be able to organize, to be able to overcome, and the sense of the strength. And it pulls these into its vital nature and vital personality. And in the mind, it takes again an imprint. Well, this life, I did a lot of intellectual work. Now I want to experience something of the devotion and the love and immerse myself in that experience and deepen it. And so it draws out that aspect of bhakti, which it had prepared across many lives before. Or having had plenty of bhakti, it says, now I want to develop my intellect, which it has prepared again maybe 1,000 lives before, but there were not so many opportunities in the last few hundred years in humanity, in society. And so it brings this forward, and then it says, where do I want to take birth? It looks for an environment suitably aligned to this, looks for the body, and enters the body. When? And Mother explains, if the soul is conscious enough, and this would be the case in this example, it can even preside over the formation of the fetus and infuse into it elements of its personality, give to it the substance of its mental and vital consciousness as the fetus forms. So it will be as a presiding personality present. If the mother is conscious, she may feel something, and as it infuses it, when the child is ready for birth, there will be a point of transition where it will put more and more of itself immediately after birth, or sometimes when it is too powerful and the body too fragile, over a few weeks after birth, during which time the body will be mostly in state of sleep, or even it may withhold elements of the stronger part of the vital or mental personality, infuse just enough that you are now in the body and struggling a little bit with the body's incapacity. And as the body grows, it draws out those elements of the stronger vital and mental nature. If it brings it prematurely, it finds the body becomes too difficult to manage, so it reduces until it can match. And now when finally the body comes into its own in the teenage, it can pull the full vitality and the full mental power, and now it's a relief I can think and feel myself entirely. You see, that whole experience has the sense of continuity and drawing even the sense, oh yes, I was there in that life. That is now, the memories are familiar, but now this is my new focus. You do not have a sense of loss of continuity anywhere in the personality. And yet the personality has to infuse itself now into the new body. In this sense, you are now practically immortal. You take on a body, you can drop the body, take on a new one as necessary. But still, you have to discard the physical form, pass to other worlds, and in its return put on a new body. The awakened mental and vital Purusha, preserving the mental sheath and the life sheath of the subtle body, which are usually discarded, would return with them into a new birth and keep a vivid and sustained sense of a permanent being of mind and life, constituted by the past and continuing into the present and future. And so now this personality will say, oh yes, I remember I was in such and such a space. I don't remember details now. It was many, many years ago. It was in a different body. So the imprint may be to that extent vague enough, but still the sense of continuity and the sense of continuity into the future also. I know that after this shedding this body, I will continue. I will have the free choice of what I do in the transition in between worlds, and I will choose my new body. Such would be the case in certain exceptional non-evolutionary personalities already, where the personality is of a being not of the human evolution, therefore not necessarily emerging from below, but one who has taken on a human body for a purpose, sheds it, and then again perhaps chooses to reincarnate or not. And so these are exceptional vibhutis. They may carry memories of their past. In the Tibetan tradition, it is believed that the Dalai Lama is one such, that it is the same being who reincarnates. And this is the 14th in the series of incarnation. And there's an old tradition that says it will be the last. And the present Dalai Lama was asked about it. He said, yes, it's possible. Of course, you can see the role that he had when he took on that to lead the Tibetan culture, both spiritually and politically in the Buddhist practices. That role now has substantially changed. There is no more the physical space that is Tibet. The culture itself has spread and become many pockets all over the world. And you can see the practical utility of a governing head may or may not remain. And so the being presiding over the evolution may say, fine, I don't need any more a physical body. I will still guide people from an inner plane more freely now, because I don't have to drag this body around all over the world and fly in aeroplanes. From my subtle body, I can be with many more people at the same time more easily. So that choice is there. But such would be the case also for those very specialized beings who may carry elements of the personality to this extent that they are already individualized as subtle beings from another world who take a human incarnation for a very limited specific purpose. But in an evolutionary being emerging like this, the experience would be not different. Keeping a vivid and sustained sense of a permanent being of mind and life, constituted by the past, and continuing into the present and future. But the basis of physical existence, the material body, could not be preserved even by this change. Well, that's how it is. The body does not have the same support for the soul's continuing evolution. It needs to be changed because the soul needs a vehicle that can keep up with its needs, its plasticity and its evolutionary requirement. So, the physical being could only endure if by some means its physical causes of decay and disruption could be overcome. And at the same time, it could be made so plastic and progressive in its structure and its functioning that it would answer to each change demanded of it by the progress of the inner person, capital P. It must be able to keep pace with the soul in its formation of self-expressive personality, its long unfolding of a secret spiritual divinity, and the slow transformation of the mental into the divine mental or spiritual existence. So the body must be able to keep up with this requirement. Now he has described this requirement differently from before. Earlier, you saw the keywords were the powerful individualization on the surface, the bridging with the unification with the inner mind and inner mental Purusha, and third, at the same time, so open plastically to the progressive action of the infinite. Now here when he is speaking of the body, you do not need the same kind of individualization because the body is already a very rigidly formed individual unit. In fact, that's the problem when we take birth, when we enter the physical body. If the mind is quite plastic and developed, when you're in the subtle body, your mind actually feels wide. Your vital feels so large. You enter the body of the newborn child and there's this dulling, narrowing, compression and dullness of the mind. Suddenly my mind is locked into this physical head. My vitality is bound into the physical body. I feel rigid, narrow, small, weak, helpless. And a sharp contrast to what was before in the subtle body. The dulling effect is of the narrowness and limitation of the physical form. So there is no particular requirement here of the powerful individualization. Mind being more plastic, the vital being more plastic, the individualization is the organization around the focal point of I. But in the body, being so narrow already, you're locked into the body. I am body, finished. My body moves, so I have moved. In the mind consciousness, especially a wide mind in the subtle body, when you have shed the physical, where am I? I feel myself all over the place. But of course I can put a special focus here or there. So you literally, if the mind consciousness is so wide, you will literally feel yourself everywhere on earth. And oh yes, I have this little focal point of the body which is sitting in Pondicherry somewhere, but I am equally present everywhere else. But the moment I re-enter the physical body, narrowing, dulling, now I am in the body and those places are far away. Whereas earlier I was already there, there's no far or near. You see, the difference is so sharp. So here you do not have a particular requirement for the strong individualization. That is already the problem of the physical body. On the other side, on the next part is the integration with the inner. And of this, Sri Aurobindo does not give such a strong importance because when we enter the body in such a conscious mind and developed mind and vital, you will never foolishly feel I am body. You will always know you have a body, but you are not body. You've taken it on consciously as a sheath. Your mind is individualized. That is the focal point of your individuality. The error which we experience when the mind gets dulled and identified with the body is, as a child, I wake up in the body and I say, oh, I am body. And then thoughts start forming dully, oh, I am thinking. But I am body which is having thought. On the other hand, when the subtle consciousness is so developed, the mental body is so formed, I will not make that error. My body is so small and weak, it feels strange. But I am the mind, having emotions and body. So again, the need for the strong bridging with the inner is not so strongly felt here. The third requirement, which is to be plastic to the touch of the infinite, that is all that remains. And that is formulated differently. You see, in the mind, the sense of the infinite is your mind could actually think in so many different ways, could experience so many ways of perspectives of vision, or so many levels of consciousness. In the vital, similarly, so many kinds of emotions, so many modes of its energy, to become introvert, to become extrovert, to become heroic, to become inquisitive, to become shy, to become assertive. And they're all different modes, and they're all aspects of the plasticity of the vital. But in the physical body, what is the nature of the plasticity? You're not going to be changing shape. You don't want to grow out a sixth thumb or 5 arms. That's pretty much fixed. You would not be human. You don't want to become in the shape of an animal. You want to remain pretty much what it is. So what's the nature of the plasticity here? So he says, the physical being could only endure if by some means its physical causes of decay and disruption could be overcome. And at the same time it could be made so plastic and progressive in its structure and in its functioning that it would answer to every change demanded of it by the progress of the inner person. So now we need to explore. He does not go too much into detail. The mother, of course, does speak of what some of this would imply. And so we will explore the 2 facets of it. First is physical causes of decay and disruption need to be overcome. And second is that it should be made plastic and progressive in structure and functioning to answer to each change demanded by the inner person. And there are 2 different things. Within each there are finer nuances. So let's look at these now. First, he carefully uses the vocabulary, by some means, its physical causes of decay and disruption could be overcome. Why is he saying the body's physical causes of decay and disruption? Does the body have any other causes of decay and disruption? Yes. It has also emotional causes of decay and disruption. It has mental causes of decay and disruption. And those may not go away. Those may still remain. So the body would not be free of decay and disruption. It would still be susceptible to it if your vital and mental was causing the decay and disruption. How does that happen? Let's say I have developed in my personality strong habit of anger or pessimism or bitterness because I have suffered so much in my life. Everybody feels that. If you choose to take that position in relation to your past. Show me one person who does not feel they have suffered a lot. If you take that as your approach to all that happened to you. Swami Vivekananda even has a very great statement to put in this context. He says, show me a great person and I will show you how much he has suffered. Mother puts it in a different way. She says the more rich and capable the possibilities of your growth and evolution, the more you have to face problems of life to help draw out that capacity. Now, if, for example, within you was a heroic aspect, and you lived in a very protected environment, where is the opportunity for the heroism to come forward? And so life will create a crisis in your protected environment to provoke your heroism to come forward. You could focus on the crisis and say, you know what, all my life I've had people opposing me, creating trouble for me, and all the rest that comes with it, which provoked you precisely to draw out your heroism. I had to fight to survive. I had to overcome all these oppositions. And what was the result? I grew so much. If I didn't have those oppositions, I would not have drawn out this heroic capacity. Today I can stand and face anything. The whole world may turn against me and I will still say, all right, but I will stand for what I believe to be true. Maybe I'm wrong, show me and I will change myself. But I will stand for what I believe, as long as I know it's the best. I have that capacity because I went through all these years of, you can say, suffering, you can say problems, you can say challenges, or you can turn around your view of the past and say, but all these were given to me as opportunities or compelling me to draw out this capacity. And because of this, now I can look back and say, well, okay, it was not nice going through all those problems, but today I understand why it was helpful or necessary for my growth. And then I can let go of the idea of suffering. I need not attach myself to the bitterness which came with the suffering, and can be free at heart, and now full of light instead of bitterness and darkness and whatever else comes with it. But if you have stuck to the sense of bitterness, you will see what happens to the physical body. First of all, because bitterness is felt generally in the belly region. If it has gone into the heart, then it may even create problems of the heart. But generally in the stomach, digestion problems, or in the bile, the release of excessive bile, which is the sense of the bitterness in vibration. And so digestive issues related to the bile, or the sense of stones which form in the duct of the bile because too much bitterness hardening itself. You can see how the psychological condition leads to a physical problem, illness, disrupts the normal functioning of the body processes, because a knot of energy is being imprinted, fixed upon what would otherwise be a free flow of the biological energy. Remember, energy spans across all three bodies. All three bodies span across each other. We have this wrong idea that you layer. It's good for the picture for children: mind, body, vital body, and then physical body. So they are neatly separate. No, that's not how it is. They blend into each other. Your mind awareness fills the vital, fills the physical. That's how you can feel in your body the sensation. That's your mind in the body. But it cannot fully penetrate the narrow band of your personal awareness. There's a level of mind which is subconscious, which feels the subconscious tendencies of the body. And it's a two-way connection. Even as my thought influences the body, my body influences the thought. And the same with the vital. Not only it penetrates into the physical as physical energy, forming what we call the lower part of the vital, it also extends into the mental body, dynamizing the mind, giving it freshness and drive, which forms the higher part of the vital. So practically the energy is split into mental body and physical body, making for the higher vital and lower vital. The lower vital, because it is the vitality attached to the body, has narrower tendencies: survival, fear, anger, pettiness, jealousy, all the things which come with the dullness of the body and its instinctive tendency to survive. The higher vital has a more expansive domain, the vitality flowing in the mind's ideals and ideas. It can take on the form of heroism, of courage, of selflessness, or just broad action of energy. I want to control all this space. I will dominate. I will become the boss of this whole industry in its higher exaggerated forms. Or I will expand my sphere of influence. All these are expansionist tendencies freely available to the life energy because mind is more wide and plastic. But each is interpenetrating everyone else. And so the energy of my vital emotional knot is causing a disruption in the physical flow of energy, which maintains the biology and eventually causes those knots in the physical biology. Now you can operate with a surgery to remove that knot, but you have not solved the problem which is in the psychology. And that will now create a new pattern of knot, slightly different from. You cut out my gallbladder, fine, the same knot now shifts and taps into the kidneys or wherever else, or something else. Stomach pain, cramps, simply the muscle cramping. Why? Well, that's how it is. Or it infuses itself all across the physical body and takes on certain unusual diseases like fibromyalgia, where suddenly you have pain all over the body and you don't know why. It's as if in the physical body, your own body turns upon itself. What's autoimmune diseases? Where your body recognizes its own functioning as the enemy and begins to attack itself. The immune system turns against you. That's the more obvious form of it, which is in the emotions, when something in me hates my own identity. I am such a terrible person. I have such negative tendencies. I don't like this person that I am. And that will act in the autoimmune because that's closer to the emotional energy. But when my mind dislikes my body, My body is a dark shell. I don't identify with it. It constricts me, it limits me. I wanted to do so much in my life. My body binds me. I'm stuck in this space, in this situation, in these relationships. Bound. I hate being bound. And it's a mental idea. That infuses into the nerves, not in the emotions and energies, into the nerves. And suddenly my whole body feels atrophied or rigid. My plasticity is lost. And it starts paining. All the nerves become now tingly and paining. I don't know why. I have loss of energy as a result. All the strange symptoms surrounding it which form. And the result is I cannot. And in such cases where we are able to identify and the person is able to accept, if they break the physical formations, and this is the key, you break the physical formation, actually accept to break out of that trapped situation of life. Get on with the life you wanted, overcoming your fears. What prevents you from going is the fear. Now I am so old, I need this, although I hate it. Who will look after me, although I feel trapped? But I have to accept the trapment because I am aged, or whatever excuse one gives. You break out of it and literally start afresh, trusting, asking for the grace, asking for the protection from above. Break out. Immediately you find the symptoms dissipating and they go away. Now, to the extent that a psychological knot affects the biology, it can still harm the body. It can still weaken and damage it. So that's why he says, physical causes of decay and disruption can be overcome, because you still have these other mental or vital causes of disruption and decay, which may continue to harm the body. Remove those, your body can live, if the physical causes can be overcome. Now, considering that a person has evolved to this point where there's a sufficiently organized center and the mind and vital are plastic to the touch of the infinite, these priori causes of mind and vital affecting the physical decay would be hugely reduced. To the extent that they're still there as a tendency, you will have the plasticity to modify and overcome them when you become conscious of them. So suddenly I notice I'm having some strange problem in my stomach. Why is this happening? And I turn and observe in myself, oh yes, the last few weeks I have been unusually upset about something and it's been bothering me at some deep level, and I correct for it immediately. Because my mind and vital are sufficiently plastic, I am able to make that change. And so, practically speaking, those causes would no more affect the body and compel it to decay and disruption. What remains then is the physical causes of decay and disruption. Now again, we go deeper into this because he uses two words, decay and disruption. Disruption is obvious because, as we saw, the emotions or the mind fixating itself will disrupt the body. At the very least, you see this happening to many of us when our mind is so passionately absorbed in a work that we like, we drag the body. Even into its normal time of food and sleep, we ignore it. And then it disrupts the natural rhythm of the body. If you disrupt it enough, well, it causes eventually some physical problems, and the body now influences the mind. I am unable to now concentrate in my studies. All the students go through this. They work hard for hours preparing for an exam or reading and studying something which they enjoy, and after a while they just can't. And they say, you know what, I'm unable to think. What's happening to me? And ask yourself, did you get enough sleep? No. But I didn't feel sleepy. I'm so enjoying my work. You don't feel sleepy because your mind dominated the body to extinguish its habit of sleep or cover it up enough. And so now just give yourself sleep. And suddenly the fellow discovers he slept for 14 hours at a stretch, catching up for the sleep. And after that, again, the thinking power comes back. So you are disrupting all the time with your mind and emotions. But disruption is not a permanent state. And it can be corrected by becoming conscious. But decay is not something you can correct easily. Your persistent knot of mind and vital will cause the damage. And that takes time to recover. Now, removing the mental and vital causes, there are physical causes of disruption. What happened, for example, I have changed time zone. I just flew from one side of the earth to the next, to the other side. In a flight that took 12 hours, I took off in the morning and I land after 12 hours and it's bright morning again. My body wants to sleep. It's fascinating to observe how it works. I've seen, because I've had to do this frequently these last few years, going literally to the other side of the earth, 12-hour difference. It's fascinating to see. Your mind can actually shift time zones very quickly. Sometimes a day, sometimes a few hours. You just tune yourself to think, okay, it's morning. No problem. And then you notice, while my mind is fresh, my body is suddenly going to some kind of a chill. And it matches exactly my home time of 3 a.m., 4 a.m., when the body temperature drops to the lowest, the core temperature goes to its lowest. And that's happening when I'm fully awake. My mind is fresh and my body is feeling this chill that's happening. Fascinating. And then the body's automatic processes of digestion. The hunger kicks in the middle of the night when it should have been lunchtime in my home zone. And the emotions, the digestive processes, which for the night time would be in sleep, and they wake up in the morning, now it's in the evening that I need to clear my bowels. And I, as mind, am looking at this body and it's out of sync with me. You see the difference? And then it creeps down. Gradually the vital body sinks, it takes a day or two, and then it creeps down to the physical body. Even in the physical body, the body has a sense of perspiring. At a particular time, early morning, the body releases pheromones, perspires, releases liquids in the eyes which quickly harden to clean the eyes and take any dust and accumulate at the edges of the eyes, and it happens early morning. And if you have not passed through that passage, you don't wake up fresh, interestingly. And now this is happening while I'm awake and fresh. Suddenly my body is perspiring, my eyes are putting this, and this thing forms while it's my dinner time. Very strange. And then those functions now begin to catch up, and the lowest functions, the most subconscious functions, are the last to catch up. So if you observe the shift of time zone, it's happening across grades of consciousness, top down, and the most rigid are the lowest, until it sinks into that, and then at some point the body fully catches up. Typically for a 12-hour time zone change, it takes 7 days for that last part to catch up. And I noticed in my earlier age, so if I go back 10 or 15 years, when I had to make a trip like that, the mind could imprint will on the vital or the physical to shape. And only the lowest portions would take a week to change. But other levels, including even the food cycle, to a great extent could be willed within 2 days. And then now with age, it's as if I have lost that access. It's as if the subconscious is pushing back against the mind, and the access of the body's plasticity is now reduced. And I cannot will it so easily. If I do will it, there are side effects. The body now disrupts in a particular way which is unhealthy for me. It tires easily, or something which is not nice. It strains. So I have to say, all right, I'll adjust to the body. Okay, you try to adjust to me, I'll adjust to you, and so on. But these are disruptions. I took this as an example of disruption. But you see the relationship also across the three bodies. Very interesting interdependence. But disruptions can happen from anything. From the food you eat, the environmental changes, it's too hot, it's too cold, physical causes of disruption. The food you ate was not what you're normally used to. You have gone into a different cultural space where the food is completely different. The body is not getting its protein, which it used to get for a vegetarian more from the lentils. And now I've gone into a space which is not so vegetarian. When I went to Japan, this was the experience I had. You don't have the lentils in the food. And the food they gave was very light. I didn't have the heaviness which the body needed to feel that it is now full. So, okay, we could adjust to that for a while. But then after 3 days, typically, I found the body craving now dal. It needs that protein. And I'm looking for it. And it's interesting, if you observe carefully, the body craves the foods which have more of the proteins. My intelligence does not know which food has proteins. But the body, when it sees or it tastes, it feels it wants this more. And then if I look up the book, I find, oh, this has more protein. That's why it was craving it. Very interesting. It has its own intelligence. So you are looking at disruptions happening from all kinds of things. Can the body adapt? And you will see often people say, now with age, I need my routine. Otherwise, I can't function. But a young person is able to adapt. And if you take a young child, put him in a completely different environment with completely different climate and different food habits, it can adjust very quickly. But with age, it's more difficult. One of the things I noticed also when going to northern climates, my body was tuned into the heat of Pondicherry. I could adjust to any amount of heat, no problem. Okay, it does affect a little bit, but you can adjust. But going into cold, a little bit of cold and my body would have a reaction. And it took me a few years to work on it, only on the occasions when I was in the cold, to teach the body now to adjust. And now after so many years, very brief experiences of cold, I can actually enter a cold space, adjust the body sufficiently to manage to quite an extent. Not yet the way they do it there, but it takes me 3 days to adjust the cold. Then I can function normally with limited clothing, even in a cold space. But that adjustability of the body actually exists. The human body is one of the most adaptable creations. More adaptable than any of the animal creations of the past stages of evolution. It is one of the special features. In the Upanishads, it is described that the gods were offered various vehicles to incarnate on earth, and they said, this is not good enough, that is not good enough. And finally, when the human being was offered, they said, yes, this one is good, and now we will incarnate. And they descend into the body, each taking a particular station in different parts of the body. And it's actually the story of evolution. That the higher faculties of mind and of the emotions, powers of consciousness, can only put out an influence in the lower forms to create in them the necessary vehicle in which the full power could descend to incarnate and act freely. Indra entering the body is the conscious intellect, self-aware, taking charge of the mind and organizing the thoughts around it. But it is literally the incarnation of a conscious power which is universal, but now taking an individual station. But in order for him to be able to enter, it needed the body to evolve to a level that it could handle that incarnation and allow its expression. So we find the body has been prepared to become plastic. If you look at the Earth's varied climates, people living at the top of mountains, where the oxygen content may be radically less than in the plains at the sea level, they are able to run up and down the mountain, carrying heavy loads effortlessly. And the same genetics, pretty much, at the sea level will find it difficult. The moment they go up, they are breathless. They fall sick. But if you stay there for a few weeks or months or years, you find you can do the same as the people who lived there. And if you did it in childhood, you have acclimatized at a level which allows you extraordinary capacities. Low oxygen, your body will adjust. High pressure, your body will adjust. High temperature, cold temperature, anything. Food. Even foods which are insufficient by normal standards, the body will adjust and find the means to manufacture the amino acids. And it will find the means to manufacture them out of the limited nutrition that you have. It is enormously adjustable. In fact, if you took such a person to Mars, we could adapt. If we did it early enough in childhood, or if you allowed enough time. Mars is habitable by human beings in spite of lower air pressure and temperature ranges, if you allow this adaptation, and so on. Now it means this vehicle is something very special. It already has within it a plasticity. Why? Because nature has been preparing it for precisely this transition which we are now reading. And there is interesting evidence to suggest that it is even one of the most plastic beings across planets in the universe. That beings from other planets look upon the human body and say, this is something so extraordinary. Our bodies don't have that kind of plasticity as the human has. Just as the human earth has a diversity of human types which is far greater than in any other planet in the universe. And that's why Mother spoke of our physical earth as a special focal point for the psychic evolution in the universe. But that's a different thing to discuss another time. The idea here is there is in the body this plasticity, and yet there is a tendency for decay. And the two are contradictory to each other. It's as if on one part the body is able to adjust to changing circumstances. On another part, when circumstances change too much, it breaks down. It cannot adapt anymore. And interestingly, after a while, even if circumstances remain the same, it begins to break down. And so you will notice one of the things which happen with age is earlier I could do all this, now it's gradually narrowing, until you come to something so narrow that it becomes suffocating. I remember still seeing this, someone who was in the ashram nursing home, she was sick, and I had gone to see her, and she'd been in now bed for many months. She said to me, can you switch on the fan? So I switched it on. And then she said, no, that's too fast. Reduce it a little bit. So I reduced. She said, no, that's too slow. Speed it up slightly. So I pushed it up. No, slightly reduce. And until she got, okay, that's just right. Okay, don't change anything. Now imagine the person had become so narrowed in the level of comfort that she could not adjust if it was too fast or too slow. And it's as if everything becomes narrower and narrower. You will see this in people who are now bordering transition, where the body now is going to be shed by the soul. Everything becomes narrower. The blood pressure cannot go too high, it cannot go too low. When in my youth the band was so wide, now it is becoming narrower. My levels of sodium and potassium can go high and low in fluctuation, but now that band becomes narrower for my survival. Anything too high causes my heart to pulse too rapidly, too low makes me unconscious, and the band is becoming narrower. It's literally the flexibility of the body's capacity narrowing, which is the nature of the decay. But there's a more fundamental sense of decay which is in the working of the cells. You see, your heart which is beating is one of the most young organs because it has to take you through 24 hours without ever resting. But it is continuously being regenerated by cells replacing the old. Although certain cells die, new cells take their place, and it stays often the youngest part of you. And yet there are cells dying, they're being replaced. And if you look more deeply at this question of degeneration or decay, you see it is so fundamental to the cellular consciousness. At an organic level, we find my heart is now less capable, my kidneys are functioning less efficiently, my muscles have become more rigid, less elastic. But why is this? It is the sum total of the cellular degeneration which is at the root of the problem. In the replacement, the new cells that come somehow have less capacity. And yet, you discover the key to that permanence is already there. When a woman becomes pregnant, the child is made of her existing body tissue, which is now growing to become the youngest thing possible, the most fresh, elastic, plastic material of substance, which her body is producing in itself. And when she gives birth, that one is the new body, which is going to last longer than her life. And yet it came out of her own body. How do you explain that? Interestingly, during the time when the child is in the womb, there's a huge exchange of blood. Because the mother's blood is feeding the child's blood. The child's new tissue and the stem cells are also coming into the mother's bloodstream. And the stem cells of the child are filling her body, her muscles, her tissue and her heart, and literally give to the heart a whole new stem cell regeneration therapy. Now, what is interesting is after childbirth, the mother's heart has actually become more young as a result of the stem cell shared by the child with the mother. So you see, nature's mechanism is so wonderful. Even as the mother gives birth to the child gives a gift back to the mother, and her body is effectively younger. In the old days, it was normal for a woman to have multiple deliveries. You didn't have means of preventing pregnancy easily. So the result was often they had at least half a dozen or more childbirths. They lived longer, more healthy. And after each childbirth, somehow the body was more plastic. I remember one woman who had at least 9 childbirths, only 6 of which survived. And as she went on through the childbirths, she said in the last couple of births that she had, it was time for her birth, for the birth of the child. The husband was out, she was alone at home. So she gave birth to the child, washed up the child, prepared him, and when the husband came home, she said, "Look, what a gift I have for you." Completely normal biological function. None of the things which you see today, somebody struggling in a hospital bed with all kinds of monitors, people around them, normal biology, birth done and everything was fine, which is what it would happen perhaps in the forest, even if you were all alone. You cannot be so vulnerable. But it's as if across the childbirths, her body had become more elastic, more strong, more capable. And so there's something happening in the body which allows it the capacity to regenerate, and yet there is a decay. And somehow in time the decay overwhelms this capacity of regeneration. Why is that so? And this solution is not given by science. Science says we cannot understand why this happens. In fact, there are certain cell lineages which, taken into the petri dish, live forever. You put them back into the body and they start to age and die. You take them out into the petri dish and they continue. And they can continue as young as they were always. They just keep on growing. Why is that? There's a particular line of cells which are used for cancer research. Now, if you do a research for cancer cells in the lab, in a petri dish, with some new medication, someone does it here in India, someone does it in Europe, how can you know whether you have the same effect if the cell lines are totally different? You're not taking into account genetic distinctions, isn't it? How can you rely on the research being actually valid? And so you go back to somewhere in the 1940s, where there was one woman who had a really bad case of cancer, and her cancer cells were taken out from her body and made the basis for all global cancer research. So if you're going to do cancer research, it's her stem cell line that you have to take and perform the tests on hers since the 1940s. And those cells are just as young in your petri dish. And they continue to give birth to new cells. Even as the old one die, the line of cells is the same across the whole earth. Made the, so to say, global reference for cancer research. But the cells are fine. And they continue to give birth. Some die, the new ones come, and they are just as effective. If it was in the same body, her body should have continued to be pretty much as young. But in the petri dish it works, put it back in the body, all the body cells begin to degenerate and age until they break down. So mother looked at this question and went deep into it. She went into the cellular consciousness to see what was the cause of this decay. And she said the cells have a habit of decay and death. Even there was no need for the cell to die if it's functioning efficiently. Why is there a lifespan to the cell itself? It's a habit. If you look at the skin cells, they have a lifespan of a few days. If you look at nerve cells, they have a lifespan of a few months, and so on. But they stay like clockwork within that lifespan. You take them out into the petri dish, they stay young, but they still have that lifespan of the cellular type. And mother says, going deep into it, she discovered that this habit of decay and death came into the cells in the early stages of life, when life was emerging out of matter against the resistance of matter. And again the resistance would pull it back and it would collapse, and again push up, again fail, and again push up, and again fail. And the repeated attempts, maybe for some billions of years, of rising and failing, built into the cells the habit that they have to rise and then now they have to fall. As a habit. And that habit then continued as the materials became more complex. The cells combined to create creatures, beings, forms. Each cell would say, oh, now it's time for me to collapse and die. And so I give birth to another cell and then I die. And so on. And when the organic formation of the being takes place, in that the habit says, all right, now I have to give birth to another child and I have to die. And that habit is what continues. So life force effectively organized an immortality by throwing itself out into new forms, but the forms itself it allowed to decay because, well, that was the habit in its early origins. And the mother said, looking at that habit, she said there was no reason for it to continue. If she could convince the cellular consciousness now to turn away from the habit of the inconscient past and instead turn to the superconscious awareness and submit to it rather than the inconscience. Now look at it very interestingly. The cells can turn in and say, oh, my past inconscient habit is to die, or the cells can become aware of the consciousness that fills it. I will into my body that it should stay young, and the cells feel me rather than the old inconscience of matter, and they turn to me, my mental awareness, and say, all right, we will stay longer. They obey my will rather than the inconscient will. Finally, it's will of some kind acting upon it. But my mind is not enough to be able to penetrate into the cells because the cellular consciousness is subconscious to my mind. Mother had to enter it by other means. And the power of the mind is weak compared to the will and power of the inconscient. And so the mother brought in a higher consciousness, an intuitive consciousness, an overmental consciousness, a supramental consciousness, and its influence to whatever degree the cells could receive. And in the practical result, she said she was able to literally make the cells conscious of the divine and awaken in the cells an aspiration for the divine and turn their allegiance to the divine consciousness. And if the divine consciousness is naturally immortal and the cells align themselves to it, there's no reason for them to decay or die. So this is a radical experiment which has never been made before in not only human history but universal history of the universe, across all species, across all planets. Always matter was seen as, all right, it's the substance of inertia, it is subconscious, it is even inconscient, and a domain of ignorance to be shed and to be replaced in this mechanism of maybe a conscious transition. And so the mother did something which has not been done, and it has set a new precedent in the human consciousness and in the universe. And so this goes to the root cause of decay, and the disruption now is secondary cause. If this physical causes of decay and disruption could be overcome. Now here's the means which is directly from within the cellular consciousness. But if the cells can respond to higher consciousness which can overcome their habit, can they not respond to another consciousness of their own level? A subconscious push? That also is possible. Medication of various kinds. What is medicine after all? What are the different responses that the cells have to chemicals that you introduce in the body or the hormones which you might inject? They are also acting upon the will, a part of their habitual process of relationship to the physical universe. And so you can pump into the body a little bit of sodium and potassium, and immediately the heart starts beating faster. For a while my mind is more awake. Why? Because there is a certain relationship of the cells and the biological organic function with those materials. Are there materials which you could bring into the body at an organic level? Now forget the cells. Maybe the cells will die, but my organs will regenerate, and practically then I will have overcome the decay. And that could be done perhaps. In fact, we do discover materials which compounds that have an unusual effect on the body. They are able to make the body more elastic. They're able to sustain or delay the aging process. A lot of research going on today. In the maximum investment in the medical industry today is on anti-aging or life extension technologies, and we have many such. They are not going to the root cause of the cellular decay. They are only triggering the cellular regeneration or stem cell mechanism which already exists in you, like the child born gives back to the heart a fresh heart through a stem cell therapy. Well, I don't need to go through childbirth. For that, I can do it by an external means of stem cell therapy, using existing mechanisms of the biology to regenerate organs or replace them. Even means are developed by which, remember, in the petri dish, they can be as young as they need to be. So I take out of my body a sample of stem cells or a particular specialization of cells, grow it into the petri dish to become a fresh new kidney, and implant my own fresh kidney back in. No rejection, no problem, but it's a fresh young kidney of my own body grown in the petri dish, replacing my old degenerated kidney. And by such organs replacement similarly, or introduction into the blood of young blood, seems to make the whole body younger. And there's a whole therapy which is being built around this. All of these are mechanisms which tap into the existing body instincts and impulses and organization to regenerate and reduce or even eliminate the tendency for decay at an organic level, but not at a cellular level. Now, as long as you have disruption or decay at an organic level corrected, you could still extend the physical life quite a bit. But you would not have overcome the root cause of the problem. And so as far as Sri Aurobindo and the mother were concerned, it is not a complete victory over the inconscious. The complete victory will be when you're able to enter the cellular consciousness and change their need to decay or be disrupted. And this can happen from a spiritual means by the supramental consciousness entering, awakening in it the allegiance to the divine rather than the inconscious. And the power and flexibility and immortality of the spirit would then infuse into the cellular working and make the body not only practically free of decay and disruption, but also enormously plastic and progressive, both in its structure and in its functioning. Now, so far we have only looked at this question of physical causes of decay and disruption. We need to now explore in more detail what it means for it to become plastic and progressive, and in its structure and in its functioning. What are these distinctions? Remember, Sri Aurobindo is using these words very precisely. He could have simply said, just for the body to be plastic enough to respond to the soul. Finished. No, he says, plastic and progressive. What's the distinction? Then he highlights both structure and functioning. What's the difference? What would it mean practically? And so these we will explore next Sunday. These we will explore in the Sunday after next. As Sunday next I have to be out of station. So this will be on 17th. We will have the Friday class as usual. Only the Sunday will be skipped. I will continue this on the 17th of February. To see what these things mean and what is the full implication of the body becoming now ready to receive whatever change is required by the inner person, which would lead to a practical, physical now immortality. So we've seen a psychological immortality and then a practical physical immortality. Even after that, the soul will have the choice, of course, to shed the body if it wants, but it won't need to, if it is sufficiently supportive of this. So we'll take this up Sunday after next. For those of you who are here and who are interested, on Sunday next we will have a video of one of the earlier talks to keep the mood of the study. And we can now dwell on this. I'll reread these lines, but we will dwell on this, meditate on it for a few minutes. Make this consciously the aspiration for us, to be able to awaken and organize in ourselves this practical psychological immortality at the very least, and to whatever extent awaken in the body consciousness the necessary receptivity that eventually, even in the body, we will be able to establish this immortality. Such is the intention of nature in her larger evolution. Such is the inevitability of the evolution because of the increasing action of the spirit descending from above, seizing upon mind, life and matter to transform them into a divine mind, divine life and a divine body, a divinized physical body eventually.